All right, we're live now. So yeah, I like the lives. It was kind of intimidating at first. So I started. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 11 of the Kids from It podcast. I'm your humble host TJ Whitehead, joined today by Heather Reynolds, an old friend of mine from high school. How you doing today, Heather?
I'm good. How are you, TJ?
I'm doing fantastic. You caught us mid conversation there, like I didn't know we were going live. I just started talking, but I started doing social media stuff about 2 years ago. I started on TikTok, and I amassed a decent following over there, and kind of bled over into YouTube recently. And one thing that I always wanted to try, I was doing TikToks for about a year, and I was like, man, I should do a live video sometimes. Now on TikTok, I have a lot of people over there, so there's a lot of interaction with people. Like people are firing off questions and everything. And I was nervous that being live and answering questions on the spot, that it would be too much. It wasn't. It was actually pretty easy. It was over.
Yeah.
I made a big deal out of it when it wasn't, and then coming over, start doing stuff on YouTube. Live is just easier to transfer it over to the platform without having to cut it up. So she had asked me my preference for live or recorded, and I decided to go with live because it's just a lot easier. Talking the girls into it, it's been pretty. We've done it once, and so it's been all right. But all right, we're gonna kick off the show. The title of the show was, I titled it Maranatha Baptist Academy / Church. And I know that people coming across this video, when they hear Maranatha, they're going to think of the Maranatha in Wisconsin, because that's the one that people know in our circles. It's not that one. This is the church / school that Heather and I went to back in the old 1990s, and that's where we grew up. And that's going to be in St. Robert, Missouri. It's still there, as far as I know, the church and the school. And yeah, this is I have so many wild memories from this place, and as Heather does as well, and we'll go into those in a little bit. But before we get into the specifics, we'll just ask Heather a little bit about her background. I was gonna say where you grew up. I know the answer to that question, but the people listening don't. So tell us about your background, where you grew up, and how you got into the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. That I don't have an answer. I don't know how long it started with you guys or how far back it goes.
I was born into it. I was literally born into it. So my dad, both my dad and my mom, as far as I know, were always in the IFB, in Independent Fundamental Baptist churches. I know that they like met on a bus ministry, and so my dad was a preacher, and all us kids, we were born into it. When I can't remember when Jack Hyles really became a thing, but I believe it was at the least when I was a little kid, if not before I was born. And Jack Hyles was the one who ushered in. I don't know if have you ever done an explanation of this on the show of who started IFB?
I don't know who started IFB. No, like
it was Jack Hyles out of
he was out
of Indiana. Yeah. And it was actually a reaction. It was a reactionary movement to a couple different things that was going on with the time. This was back in so this would have been before I was born. This was when it was the 70s, and things were becoming more free love, loose this, loose that. And the charismatic movement also started to grow. And Jack Hyles and a bunch of his buddies said, we need to bring the hammer down and make a more definitive doctrine and way of life and standards and beliefs and all of the above. And so I guess that would have been when my dad was probably about in his 20s. So he was born into the Baptist church movement, but the IFB didn't really start gaining sway till I believe 60s, 70s. Anyway, so I was born into it, and that was all I ever knew. I didn't know how much more you want me to go into.
So when did you start attending Maranatha?
So, oddly enough, the church that I remember of my childhood, and there were churches that we went to when I was a baby, but we moved to Rolla when I was about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, and attended Landmark Baptist Church. I mentioned that because one of your co-hosts,
I was right about to say Kai went to Landmark. I was
Kai,
right about yep.
mentioned that, and I'm like, ah, yeah. So my dad was actually the assistant pastor there. They did not have a school at the time, but we were pretty deep rooted into that church. And then my dad did not like what was coming out of the public school system, so I was in public school up to second grade, and by that point my older sister Rebecca would have gone from fourth grade into fifth grade. In middle school, the middle school had a really bad reputation, so my dad decided to pull us out and homeschool us, and that was fine, but there were a lot of things lacking with it: social interaction, competition,
Yeah.
a lot of things. Like we did the ACE curriculum, and it was like child's play for me. There was no challenge whatsoever, and my mom especially was recognizing the downside to that. So then they started looking for a Christian school to put us into. So by that point, I was in sixth grade, and they found and went and talked to Pastor Carnahan. This was when I would have been going into sixth grade, and basically, with my dad's and my mom's backgrounds, they were both hired as teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the way they were able to take care of our tuition. And so that would have been, I think, 2000. No, not 2011. Wow, I'm like way
91 or
off.
92.
Thank you. It was 92. I was 11 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and well, actually, it would have been 91. I was 10
Mm-hmm.
years old, turned 11. Um, that we started going there, and mom was an elementary teacher, and dad was a high school math teacher. Um, so yeah, that's when we started at Maranatha specifically. And of
That's
course, if
so
we go to the school, we had to be members of the church. So
yeah. That's a stipulation of the school. That is so interesting that you say that, because that's the exact same year I started at Maranatha. And so Heather was 1 grade ahead of me, and I started in fifth grade. So if you started sixth
you were
grade, that
with
means
Matt.
I was with
Yeah,
Matt. Yeah, we
yep.
started the same year. I didn't
The
know that
whole
until just
time,
now.
the whole way. Yep.
That's wild. Yeah, that is,
Yeah.
well, so but the next year I wasn't there. I went to Tabernacle for
Okay.
sixth grade and
That's
came back for
right.
seventh. Yeah, so
In
and
Lebanon, right?
in Lebanon. Yep.
Yeah,
And
I
in fact,
remember that now.
we're doing an interview with Paul Cook from Tabernacle next
Okay.
Friday. I've got him on there. But yeah, oh shit, I didn't write it down here. Oh, yeah. So Heather mentioned something there rather flippantly, but I want to dwell on this a little bit. So Heather said that she did ACE. We did ACE at Tabernacle for sixth
Mhm.
grade, and I thought it was very weird. The whole like student thing, you got to do it yourself. You had these, I don't know, it was odd. I didn't like it at all. But
Yeah.
Heather was mentioning how there was no challenge in the curriculum for her. And I want to point out Heather is a genius. I just have to say this for the record. Yeah. So listen, like don't let that be your guide of how difficult ACE is. I don't know, but I will say this is actually the Heather I was telling you about who commented. Thank you for having the courage to share.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Aw,
yeah.
that's
She
really
also
sweet.
she comes from a similar background that we did. And so I remember going to school with Heather and Matt. I was jealous of Heather and Matt the entire time I was there because they were so smart, man. Like they were this just
We had our
they,
dad who was the true genius. I mean,
hey, he was too. Mr. Lewis helped me so like with math. Like my dad is a math
yeah.
genius too. And I did not get the gene. That didn't pass down to old TJ. I got a lot of dad's traits. Math was not one of them. But dad was a horrible teacher, just terrible. Like
Yeah.
he was like one of those, you know, the memes that is like, if Johnny has 2 apples, and the parents yelling. That's kind of how my dad was. I didn't learn anything at all. So Mr. Lewis was very kind to me and helping me out with like algebra and stuff. so I could get a C minus and just barely get through it. But Matt would tell me that when you guys would get home, that your parents had like these rules for studying when you got home, that you had to, what were they exactly? Because I don't want to mess them up here. Do you
Oh,
remember them?
goodness. Honestly, all I don't really remember any specifics other than homework gets done first.
Mm-hmm.
Like pause for dinner, but
Mm-hmm.
homework gets done first. And I never felt I want to preface all this by saying
Sure.
that you got the IFB movement, you got the church. My parents were wonderful people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my dad was more heavily influenced by the aspects of the IFB movement and followed those for the majority of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But my mom was much more. I have to give a lot of credit to my mom, where my dad would kind of bring the hammer down. My mom would was a buffer for us. So I had a I feel like I had a great childhood. I They helped me develop a work ethic that I was very self motivated. I loved school. I loved learning. I loved the challenge of it. So I don't really remember any specifics of that of it's got to be this way and that way. When we would go home, it was you do your homework and
Oh, okay. All right. So listen,
that
I,
that was probably a disappointing answer. It seems like you were expecting more or something.
well, I remember Matt telling me that there was like a time limit that you had to study. I remember him saying that you got home and there was like a time. Maybe it was just for him. Maybe it wasn't for, I
Maybe
don't
it's
know.
just
But
for him.
yeah, maybe it was just for him. Yeah, because
Yeah,
Matt said I ain't doing this. But it's interesting you said that you love
that's fun.
school. I hate school. I hate it. I still to this day I hate it. It's funny. I spent so long in school with like 12 years of high school, then 4 years of college, and 2 years of
Yeah.
grad school, whatever.
Yep.
But I always say that people love learning but hate school. That's how I always put it, because I did love learning, but school I despise. But you actually like
And
school.
that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Hmm.
There were aspects of school that I absolutely despised.
Yeah.
But I loved the learning part. Yeah.
So speaking of which, having aspects of school that you despise, let's get right into that. So one of my favorite things to do is to talk about the unbelievable nature of the school that we went to. It is.
Mm,
I mean, how many people were in your graduate? I think you had two people in your graduating class. Was it just you and Trevor? Yeah, because Justin didn't graduate that year,
right.
or they wouldn't let him walk at least. Actually, I don't know if he got his diploma or anything or not. I don't know,
I do
but
not remember the details of that. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until I was watching the episode with you and Trevor, I had completely forgotten that Justin was even in our class, which I
hmm
feel terrible about because Justin was a great guy. But
hmm
yeah, he didn't graduate, and I'm not sure why. I
yeah,
can't remember.
yeah, a lot of shit like that happened a lot with our school. So our school
Yeah,
was tiny.
yeah,
The school was kind of separated into twos. You had basically your seventh grade and up and sixth grade and below. Like the school was kind of
yeah,
separated along those lines.
yeah,
And so the seventh through 12th grade, I'd say the average size was about 20 to 25 people, like somewhere, but that actually might be aiming a little high. Maybe it was like 15 to
yeah.
20
I think it was a
people
little high.
around there. And that was kind of the I had a graduating class of 4. I don't bring it up very often, but when people start talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, my graduate was 4. Like, what? 4
Yeah,
people? Yeah, 4 people.
for
Yeah.
Maranatha, you guys had a big graduating class.
I know, isn't that wild? Isn't that what I was like, my brother's graduating class 1. It was just him. It was just
Yeah,
Mark. He was the only person in his class. And that
yeah.
happened pretty often. But with these small schools that have the Christian fundamentalist setting here, I'm sure you heard Trevor and I talk about some of the rules here. Can you remember some of the odd stipulations and rules that they had there before we go into like the deeper stuff just on the surface?
Uh, so the first thing comes to my mind is attire.
Hmm.
Uh, the Especially for the girls,
Yes, the
what
girls
you
especially. Yes.
can and can't wear. Heaven's sake. The culottes. And that was for Jim. God forbid that a woman have 2 legs. So the dresses, um, one thing that I know that always irritated the heck out of me was we had to the whole aspect of accountability was like taken so far. So we had to document when and what we were doing for our daily devotions and turn that in to Mr. Ragland. I don't know if you remember that.
Hmm.
Um,
No.
if we ever missed school for anything, we had this checklist of why you're missing, has the doctor been contacted, what are you doing during your time at home, are you still having your devotions? Those kinds of checklists that just, I know it drove my mom nuts.
I imagine.
And it was
You
just
know,
like, she's sick and needs to go to bed. you know,
you know
and it's
what?
okay if she watches a movie while she's laying there sick, because God forbid, he was like, no, you're not supposed to watch TV. You're not supposed to do any of this. It's like, I'm at home. So
You know,
those were a couple things.
now that you mention it, I do remember that checklist. I had
Yeah.
completely forgotten about that. That when
We
you were
block
off,
these things out.
yeah, that's wild. Wow, because yeah, once you start, I forgot about the devotional thing. But when you mentioned the checklist, oh, that's right. When you had a sick day, you had to like mark off all this
Yeah.
stuff on the checklist. Oh, I forgot. Oh, that's a good one. I forgot all
So to
about
the
that.
point where I hated being sick
Hmm.
because I felt like that I had this microscope on me. That even if I wasn't present, they were still micromanaging every tiny detail of what I could or couldn't do.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a big one for me.
The clothing. When you said the first thing that came to your mind, it was the attire. My first thought when you said that was the jumpers for the girls,
Yep.
because to this day I've never seen anything quite that intricate when it comes to clothing, because it's it's not enough to just say it was a uniform. It was a pattern. So
Yeah.
like they had to create these dresses for the girls. You couldn't buy them. There was like
Right.
a
Oh
specific
yeah,
pattern.
mom had to make all of ours.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know how everyone else got, because everyone can't make a dress. And so like people, I guess maybe there's some sort of underground market where they were making dresses, because I know my mom sure as hell didn't make a dress for Essence. I know that
Yeah.
didn't happen. I don't know where she bought them, because you couldn't just buy these off the rack. They were very
They had to be
nondescript.
yeah. They
Yeah,
had
it's
to
hard
be
to.
very non-form fitting.
Mhm.
Women, young women were not allowed to. It was not to be known that they had boobs.
Yes, yes. And you
Um,
mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
no, it's okay. I think that and I could be wrong about this, but my educated assumption is that some of the families, like maybe in your mom's situation, would have other women in the church who knew how
Yeah.
to do it. They would buy the materials and pay a little bit of a fee of, hey, can you make these for my daughter? So
Had to be, right? Yeah, it had to
yeah,
be. It's just
yeah,
like I was like, that's why there had to be some sort of market that they had, amongst themselves. Because I certainly
right.
didn't see it. I don't. But also, you mentioned the culottes. So I imagine
Mhm.
a lot of people may not know what culottes even are, because the only time I've ever seen culottes in the wild, like in the real world out here, is with female golfers. That's the only
Yeah.
time I ever, and they are not the culottes that I saw as a child.
No,
Like
no,
they just look like slightly long shorts is what they look like in the real
right.
world. But the culottes that the girls wore when they went to gym and they played volleyball or whatever, you know what they look like? They look like parachute pants, kind of.
Yeah,
Like for that, they're
they basically were, imagine a pretty full skirt, not straight down, a pretty full skirt, uh, but two of them,
mhm.
one
Yeah,
for each leg. As a matter of fact, I always laughed at how much more uh, inappropriate
immodest the culottes
culottes
actually were. Yes,
were, because
yes.
I can't tell you how many times in the middle of a volleyball game, and I'm talking about, yeah, it happened at practice, but I'm talking about in the middle of a game where there's people in the seats and people from the church and everything, and I'm diving for that ball, and when I get my bearings, my culottes are up to my face, and
I
I'm like, well, hello.
this is
And I remember one time in particular that happened, and I went to, I think, Mr. Edmonds. He was our coach at the time, and I said, "Can I please wear shorts under my culottes because I just exposed myself to
mhm.
everyone." And he asked, I don't know if he asked Ragland or Carnahan or both, but they said no. Why? Because shorts are bad.
No,
Not even
that
kidding.
doesn't even. Wow.
Yep.
That's actually kind of surprising, even for them.
I know.
Right? That doesn't make, because like, what if you were like spandex? I don't know. Because the funny thing, I don't know if Matt told you this, for the basketball team, we wore pants, which is also kind of funny. Looking back at those
Right,
videos, like
as
basketball,
opposed to shorts, yeah.
but we did have to wear shorts underneath our pants. Like that was a rule that we were forced to wear shorts beneath our pants. And for the same reason that, you could like your pants could slide down or something.
Mhm.
And I remember on a couple of occasions, it didn't happen often, but a couple of, because guys didn't like doing it, wearing shorts under your pants. It's uncomfortable.
hot,
You get hot.
yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of us wouldn't do it. And I remember on a couple of, it didn't happen much when I got older. This happened when I was younger, like 8th or 9th grade. We would have short checks where like
Yes.
we run by the coach and we had to like pull the pants to show we were wearing shorts. And if you didn't do it, like, okay, well, you're not wearing shorts, they made you run or something like that. So the fact that they told you no, specifically not to wear shorts, is kind of fucked up. And I had the same thought back then. I said, look, these culottes are far more immodest than a regular pair of shorts that
Yeah.
would not ride up past your hips whenever you dive for a ball.
No, they said that it was up to us to keep ourselves modest, like in the middle, in a free fall.
I know. Oh,
Like, okay,
Jesus.
you're tumbling for a ball that if you don't get it, you'll get in trouble. Like, oh, you let that ball go. But you've got to make sure that you're like, fixing yourself so that when you land, it's not, you're not shining to everybody.
Oh God. This question wasn't on the list that I sent you, but I don't think you'll have an issue rolling with it.
Okay.
You were talking about how you asked Mr. Edmonds and he asked Mr. Carnahan everything about getting this together. The staff that they had working at these schools, I would say it was mostly hit or miss. A lot of miss. Very, very few hits, I gotta say, when it came to the people we had working there. And Mr. Ragland was one who was like always a nemesis of mine. To this day, I don't have a high opinion of him. I don't know what your thoughts were about. He seemed to be someone who really enjoyed the fact that a bunch of 13-year-olds were scared of him. Like he really seemed to love that. I remember
Very
one thing
much.
he used. Yeah. So do you remember this? I bring this up a lot when I talk about bad teachers. He would have these little things he would say to like put down the students for no reason. And one of his favorites were someone would raise their hand, ask a question, and he would say, put your hand down. Your hand goes up, your brain shuts off. Do you remember that? I remember him saying that all the time.
I don't remember that one. I remember him saying, wait, and then you can ask an intelligent question.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yes, he would say that all the time.
Oh, yeah, he would say it all the time. He'd make you feel that small. He actually said, and I can't remember if he said this to me specifically or he said it to a group of us. I remember him, I'll never forget him saying this. He said, I know I intimidate people and I like it.
Oh, I didn't hear that, but that's not surprising.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly.
I did not forget that. I want to say he said it just to a small group of us, like maybe we were doing yearbook or something. And he said it, and I mean, he was strutting. It was just like, you gotta be kidding me.
Yeah. He genuinely, like, he was a genuine like sociopath with the way that, and listen, we're not here saying that discipline is bad. That's at least that's what I'm not saying. At least a lot of kids are unruly, and you got to discipline them. This is not what we're talking about. Like we're talking about someone who just reveled in the fact that kids would cower away from him when he walked in the room. I didn't hear him say that he enjoyed intimidating people, but it doesn't shock me. Not one bit.
Yeah. No, I remember that verbatim. Because it just made my skin crawl.
There was just this part about him. He wasn't the only bad one, but he was the principal for our entire time there. So, but it was this like when you're a teacher or in academia or whatever, there is a separation between you and the students. Of course, you're not supposed to be like their buddies and everything like that. But you have to treat them like people. And that did not happen. I remember he couldn't accept whenever like we knew something and he didn't. Like it really bothered him when that happened. I remember one time Matt and I were in physics class, we're probably in 11th grade, and we found out that when something has a color, the color isn't an innate property of the object. It's just a reflection of the light. So like when you turn, and the example that we learned is that when you turn off all the lights, the apple's not red anymore. It's like it has no color whatsoever. It doesn't have a color until light hits it. And we were trying to explain this to him, and he just like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That is ridiculous. And we're like, no, this is why. And he made fun of us like the whole week for this, like saying, oh, you guys, he would like see us like, these guys think apples aren't red. And I was like, but we explained this to you, man. But that's the environment that it was in, that kids weren't individuals that you were crafting into, adults and productive members of society. They were owned by their parents and then owned by you when they came to the school. That's kind of how we were treated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I could totally see him doing that. I feel like that our time period was kind of in a flux of the whole children should be seen and not heard.
Mm-hmm.
To where it wasn't quite that bad as it was like in our grandparents' when they were kids, but it's still, we were treated, I don't know, there was such a lack of respect, just
No
as a
respect
human
whatsoever.
being, as a human being, and constant put down.
Yeah, all the time. And that was just him. I mean, there were other teachers that we had a lot of issues with too. But with the school itself and with the church, we didn't talk about the church too much lately, but the culture of this place, what would you say were like some of the earliest red flags that you noticed that, hey, there's something kind of wrong here? This is because before we go on, I want to make it very clear that Heather and I were both Bible believers at this time. We weren't, we didn't have a reprobate mind. We weren't looking for ways to reject the faith or anything like that. Like we bought it hook, line, and sinker. But there were like early signs for me, definitely. And I know there was a lot for you. So I'd like to know some of the things you noticed at first. You're like, that's kind of funny for this whole, shining city on the hill thing and salt of the earth. Why are we acting like this? Or why do we teach that?
Right. I would have to say that from when I was little, even before Maranatha, inconsistencies. I know that's just kind of a broad, but I would pinpoint, I would see and notice inconsistencies. I was a very much an observer.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed things. Things didn't get past me very often, and I would see an inconsistency of, well, you say this, but now I'm seeing you act like this. And when I would talk to like my dad or even my mom, they would rightfully say, well, that's humanity. Humans aren't perfect. And so I would always go back, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I actually put that on here for when I have to say the one thing that really stands out to me at Maranatha that I just was like, that's not right. That just does not seem right, was the extreme pressure that was put, whether at church during preaching or at school in classes and at chapel, how much pressure was put on us girls to quote unquote keep our young men pure. It's up to you, young ladies, to not be a stumbling block. Young men are affected visually. You're not, but they are. And I'm like, yes, I am.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, you're completely negating. Maybe I'm not supposed to be affected visually. Oops, something's wrong with me. No, really, I did. I struggled with something must be wrong with me. But then it was just like, really? It's all up to us? The boys just can't help themselves? That just seems really, really wrong. And yeah, I would talk to my mom about it, and she'd be like, you're right. She's like, if a boy just can't help himself, that he's got an issue. So I'd have to say that also, through our time there, specifically at Maranatha, there was a lot of bullying and abuse that my dad got from those in authority when he was teaching, and also after they fired him, and so he could keep us, so we could graduate, finish our education and graduate. He became the full-time janitor. A lot of belittling, a lot of bullying. For my mom, it was extreme misogyny. Um, my mom was a very special woman, and she she could hide her burdens well, but I also knew when she was doing that, and she was sad all the time and stressed. And I remember talking to her when I was a teenager and just saying, "Mom, you don't have to go through this. Let's just go somewhere else." And I think that at that point it was like, we just want you guys to graduate. We want you to be able to graduate, and then we can leave, and you can find a college, etc., etc. So
So, oh, good.
yeah, no, that was there. I've got a couple other things here that, but those were that kind of touches on some of the earliest stuff.
Well, if you don't, I don't know if Mike, you don't want to go into detail, but I did. So you mentioned this on our phone call we had last week about the bullying your dad put up with and the misogyny your mom put up. Like, what happened there? Because I didn't know anything about this. I mean, if you don't want to go into detail, I get it, but I don't know what you meant by that.
No, it's okay. So I remember they first interviewed, and we basically kind of did a trial test on our part for the church and the school. Everything seemed great. It was like, oh, this is fantastic, great people, blah blah blah. And then we became a part of it, and it did not take long. It did not take long before it was just like, oh my goodness, unless you are in it like this, like on staff and part of the faculty, you don't realize how dark
Mm-hmm.
this place can be. Um, to the point, and I observed these things to the point where when new people would come and interview, I wanted so bad to go up to them and be like, don't, just find somewhere else to go.
Mm.
Okay, so some examples. My dad, bless his heart. Okay, you mentioned what a sweet guy my dad was.
Yeah, it
He
was. Yeah.
was. Oh my goodness. He loved teaching. He loved to help partake, put out knowledge and see those light bulbs turn on. I ended up becoming a teacher as from inspiration of both my parents. And one weakness, and this is a pretty glaring weakness as a teacher, is that he erred on the side of being fair.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't stand the idea of failing anyone. It was like, okay, Joe over here is really mathematically there, and he doesn't have to work so hard, and he's going to get good grades for it. John over here has some learning disabilities, and I'm going to tutor him as much as I need to, but I'm not going to fail him, even if he
Yeah.
struggles on the test. He went to Carnahan and Raglan about alternative ways of testing to cater to those learning disabilities, and got shot down
I can
immediately.
imagine how that went.
Why?
Yeah, I can
Because that
imagine
wasn't
how that went.
why? Because that wasn't fair. We've got to be consistent across the board to everybody. And it's like, any educator out there, any true educator out there will say, especially for those students who have learning disabilities, it is valid to evaluate them a different way. It is absolutely valid. Okay. So without being able to do those special situations for some of his students that really did struggle, my dad would just pass them,
Mm.
and he got fired for it. And it was after that, when he became the janitor, it was comments made passively and sometimes not so passively in the hall, directly to us, loudly, so that we could hear it, even though they were like, oh, we weren't talking to you, that were very belittling
Mm-hmm.
about my dad. Like, basically that was all he was good for,
Mm-hmm.
was cleaning toilets. I will say this. that years after my mom had died, my dad was home alone. I was in college at the time, and he told me that this happened. The Raglins had left Maranatha and were going. I don't know where they went, but they were at a different church. And one day, Dad gets the doorbell rings, and he goes to the door, and it's Steve Raglan, full
Hmm.
beard, and my dad was just in shock. He was just like, oh, "Hi," and Mr. Raglan started crying and reached down, and Mr. Raglan was a big man. He was tall.
Hmm.
My dad was
Hmm.
a slight little thin thing, and he said he just reached down and just hugged him and was sobbing and asked for his forgiveness.
Hmm.
And my dad was like, "Whoa, well, yeah," and invited him in, and they ended up having a really good chit chat. So I did want to say that he did apologize. The misogyny to my mom was basically just the misogyny that exists in these IFB churches, from the men to the women. Um, I don't know, honestly. I don't want to think about examples, but just belittling, and um, being snarky to
Hmm.
my parents in front of people.
Right.
Um, I think that when my mom died, I really do believe that Mr. Raglan in particular had a lot of regret. And there were ways in which he would follow up with Matt and and see how we were doing in college. And I kind of got the vibe from him that it was his way of trying to make things right,
Yeah.
which I appreciated.
Yeah. I
But
mean, I run across a lot of that in these circles, because on the one hand, look, I mean, people, the way people are, if they're just a product of their individual brain chemistry and the environment in which they were raised. Like
yeah,
that's who they're going to be. Like if I was
yeah,
born with that brain chemistry and at the same time the same location, I'd end up the same way. So it's academically you understand that. However, if they do something wrong, and I don't like the gestures of kind, just say sorry like that. I would
right,
appreciate that. That would mean a lot. That would mean a
yeah,
lot,
yeah,
if nothing else. And you mentioned what I read on here. Oh yeah, so the belittling comments.
mm,
This was like damn near a language for these folks.
yeah,
They it happened. All I remember. So you were talking about janitorial staff or whatever. So I remember uh, I think we had like some detail that kind of rotated where cleaning the lunchroom, like the kids would clean the lunchroom and like on like a schedule or something like that. And or anything. I remember sweeping in the lunchroom,
yeah,
and Mr. Raglan and two other adults. I don't remember who the other two guys were, but I remember I was sweeping there. And as I came by and I was sweeping, I remember Mr. Raglan saying, "Hey, great work, TJ. You're going to make a great housewife one day." I remember him saying that and everything. And like, and this isn't because Mr. Raglan was like cool with people being gender queer. Whatever. That wasn't it. That's not what's going on here or anything. This is like he meant it as a belittling statement because
yeah,
being a woman is bad, obviously. But
yeah.
growing up, that's how I
Or
took
being
it.
a
He
woman is lesser.
is lesser,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And being in that environment, that's how I took it. Like he meant to insult me. That was the point I'm getting at, is that
yeah,
he purposely meant to do that. And this was a common thing. And it's so interesting that you brought up Mr. Raglan showing up years later in a beard. I remember that. And the only reason I remember it is because so my family had a store back then that was right off post for people listening that don't know that. But
yeah.
I remember one day I was just me at the store, and this guy walks in, and he has a full white beard, full white
Totally
hair.
different. Yeah,
Yeah, and he starts talking, and he's like, "Hey, I'm looking for Mr. Whitehead." And I was like, "Oh, that's my dad. He's not in today or whatever." And he said, "Well," he said, "I just saw him up the road at a restaurant, and he was having dinner with this lady." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I don't think so. I think he's out of town." She's like, "No, it was this white lady. I don't know who she was, but they were together." And I was like, "Look, man, I know my dad is in this town. He's not here. I know this for a fact." And he was just pushing this like over and over again. This went on for like 5 minutes. He goes, TJ, it's me. It's Mr. Reagan. I'm joking with you. And I was like, oh, I didn't recognize him at all. He was like 40 pounds lighter and he had like a full beard and I didn't recognize him at all and everything. And I was like, oh, all right. I guess you got me. That was funny. That's I didn't recognize you, but he did seem nicer. I have to say, I thought it was just because I was an adult now, like, 20 or so, whatever. I thought that maybe, he treated you with respect once you became an adult or something. But it is good to hear that he did offer some sort of passing gesture of humanity of some sort, because that was kind of rare in that. Now, those were some of the inconsistencies you saw, like within the people themselves, the hypocrisy and going on. How about with the fundamentalist movement in general, like doctrinally? Were there any things that jumped out to you early on with there?
How early on?
So I'll give you so the earliest one that I remember is, I think I told you about it actually, when it was in 6th grade, and they were talking about evolution, and they said that
that's right.
Yeah, they gave an example that said the fox date the rock, the rocks date the fossils, and the fossils date the rocks. That's circular reasoning. That's how evolution is bad. And the first thought I had was, wait a minute, we say that God is right because the Bible says so, and we say the Bible is right because God says so. That's circular reasoning. That's the first one I remember. Do you remember anything like that?
So I can't say that before college anything really stood out to me as far as doctrinally, because that's all I'd ever known.
Mm-hmm.
It really started to become so much more clear to me, ironically, during college. And I say ironically because I went to a Baptist Bible college. But I have to say that the theology classes, the Bible classes, the science classes, I did science and math education, really opened up okay. And not all, but a few of the professors that I had were very much, we will teach you the spectrum. It's up to you what you want to decide. And it was like, wait, I can do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoa. And one of the aspects as far as science goes is the whole aspect of evolution. Because we have been raised with just this is how it was creation. It's only this old and no other possibilities. And it's like, well, you look at Genesis chapter 1, and it itself refers to two creations. What?
Two creations.
Oh, that's just, we just can't understand that. And I'm like,
it's not a contradiction, it's a clarification. Or something.
Right. So
they taught you evolution at Northland?
No, they didn't teach evolution. But when I say that they taught spectrum, I was thinking more of like the Bible classes.
So which one of those jumped out at you? Because I'll tell you a great one for me. I'll tell you a great one that I read. I took a class called Old Testament Geography. That's the class I took, Old Testament Geography. Mm-hmm. And I have my instructor, Dr. Radford. He was talking. So do you remember the people making fun of folks who said that the Hebrews didn't cross the Red Sea, they crossed the Reed Sea? I don't know if you ever heard that in church. No. I remember hearing it all the time. People would talk about Moses actually crossed the Red Sea. Now, you might hear some people saying that he didn't cross the Red Sea, he crossed the Sea of Reeds, which is like this pond, this lake. And I remember hearing this like from evangelists all the time, saying that, they're doing that to limit the power of God and discredit the Bible. And that's the only time I ever heard. I never heard anybody in real life talk about the Sea of Reeds until I got to college. And then in this class, Dr. Radford was talking about the Hebrew Exodus. And he mentioned how he didn't believe that the Hebrews crossed the Red Sea. He didn't believe it at all. And I was like, this is the first time I've heard any one of us saying it's also the edge of my seat. I had to know why. And he mentioned that I think the Bible says that there were 3 million men from the Israelites who were in Egypt. And so if you extrapolate from that, there's 3 million men, probably roughly 3 million women as well. And then you have children. and you have old people, and you have all of their equipment, you have all of their animals. And so you're talking like 8 million people along with their livestock and their equipment. And the Bible says that they crossed the Red Sea in one night. And Dr. Radford said that you can find the narrowest part of the Red Sea possible. 8 million people can't cross it in 8 hours. It's not going to happen. He's like, there's no way. There's no logistical way that could have happened. So he said that the Sea of Reeds actually made sense to him because it was a lot shallower. It was smaller. It's like an easy mistake. Someone could have, when they wrote it down 4,000 years ago, and the Red Sea is right there. So it's an easy mistake that could have happened when the story first came and the legend kind of grew. And that was the first time I saw anyone like in an authority position kind of challenge the stuff we were talking about. And there was another one in a class I didn't actually take, but I had friends who did take it. And it was called Modern Creationary Thought. And in that class, they talked about the book of Genesis. So for those of you who don't know, the book of Genesis is a wild read. Give it a try something. It is a fun read going through all that shit. But it has a lot of like ancient Near Eastern Babylonian influence from the legends of those times. And if you look at those kings from back then, they all lived hundreds of years, and so did the early people in the Old Testament. So like Lamech lived 777 years, Methuselah lived 969 years, Adam was 930 years. And they need a way to explain this for biblical literalists. And so one thing that they talk about is the canopy theory, that the Bible says it didn't rain before the flood, and that the waters fell from the sky, the windows of heaven opened, everything. So like, here's what happened. There was a canopy of water that surrounded the earth, and the water is what fell to the earth and caused the flood. And this canopy trapped in a bunch of oxygen, and it will increase the oxygen levels in the earth. And that's why people live so long, because of the oxygenated air. It also explains dinosaurs, because lizards never stop growing. And if you have a higher oxygen environment, you get giant lizards. They had it all figured out. But then my friends told me to take the class. Is like, the canopy theory actually can't possibly be true. I said, why not? They said, well, because if a canopy of water was surrounding the earth, the surface temperature would be like 1,000 degrees every single day. Like that's just the math doesn't work on this. So the canopy theory. And so little things like that, where in college I found out that a lot of the urban legends we were taught to justify that the Bible was literally true really started putting a dent in that. I was wondering if you ran across stuff like that too.
So kind of, sort of. I do. Okay, so I wanna rebut your 2 points real quick. If my dad were here, he'd say this for the whole Red Sea versus Reed Sea.
Yeah.
Makes sense for the crossing of the Hebrews, but how in the world did a little lake/pond drown an entire Egyptian army then?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it wouldn't. That would have been the real miracle. The actual miracle.
Yeah, it's like, well, then even a greater miracle occurred when
I know.
an entire army drowned in 2 feet of water.
I know. And the funny thing is that the obvious answer is none of this fucking happened. Like that's the real answer.
Well,
but it's just
so for the canopy, so it's interesting because I remember learning about the canopy theory and all that, and I never understood. It's just like, how do they know that it didn't rain before that? Like, I think it references that, doesn't it?
It references a mist. I think it references that the plains are watered by a mist. Yeah, I think it says that. I have to check.
On a different note, one of the theories, and it has a pretty good scientific backing of the reason why the lifespan was so long back then is because mankind was relatively young. And so you don't have the buildup of recessive genes, which cause sickness and ailment and stuff like that. So
we were a brand new. We were fresh off the presses. We were the best versions of humans. Yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah.
Right. Which there is, in my opinion, some scientific truth to that, because whatever age you put on the universe, the Earth, our galaxy, anything like that, man has not existed as long as all of that. We came to be later. But anyways, that's not something I don't know. I have to tell you this, that after losing my dad in 2011, um I did not do well after that, and it was
Mm.
just kind of in survival mode. My sister did not, she never recovered from that, and had to start taking care of her literally. And uh, the is around that time that I just kind of stopped caring. I was not
Mm.
caring about life, but I mean, it's like, you know what? Believe what you want to believe. I'm okay with
Yeah.
that. So, as far as, oh, but Heather, you should study this and know this. Like, no,
No,
I'm
not
gonna live
really.
my life.
Turns out you don't have to at all. Turns out
You
you don't
don't
have to
have
at all.
to. You don't have to.
So how did it go when you I guess like what was the turning point that made is that the time when it started falling apart for you after your father passed away and you began to take care of your sister that I don't know, had you left the faith by then or was that ended up
No,
what pushed you out?
but I definitely was struggling.
Hmm.
Let me get my notes here. So I was going to read something that I have here.
Sure.
Go back to your question of what circumstances led you to leave the fundamentalist movement.
Hmm.
And I mentioned, during my college years, I started to realize how the problem was not with the faith, but with the established IFB churches. One of the factors was standards that were based on power and control. Um, in one hand, they would tell us, make your beliefs based on what God's word says. But then what about girls not being able to wear pants and various and sundry other things? You're taking your ideology and finding a verse, pulling it completely out of context and everything and saying, "Whoop, see, there it is." And at the end of the day, it all came down to a patriarchal control.
Hmm.
Um, so my first point of turning, I guess you could say, was when I started realizing that man, our church has got issues.
Hmm.
We're interpreting scripture wrong, and so on and so forth. And yeah, after my dad died, a lot of things happened with that. You got a great cat too,
Yeah, this is Wolfie. He always
Wolfie.
yeah, he always jumps in to bother me during Zoom calls and
Yeah. Hi, baby.
podcasts.
So
So
we have a Russian blue. She's not up here now. She was actually all over the computer when I first started. She was like peeking her head over, and her name's Riley. Oh my goodness, she's so sweet.
he's a big
Um,
baby. Don't humor him. He's a
I can't help it. Okay, so I did really start struggling with my faith around the time, we lost dad. Um, Months after his death, our house burned down. His house burned
Oh,
down. Was set fire. We lost
what
almost
happened
everything.
there?
Oh gosh, that's
Because I didn't know that till last week when we talked. You said, "Oh, yeah, said the house burned down." Wow, what? How did that happen?
really long story. Basically, the very short version, and we know who it was. A couple of teenagers threw a Molotov cocktail into it.
What? What?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, why? I'm sorry. This is like that. Your house was burned down. I thought it was like the electrical wiring was bad or
No,
something. But
no, it was set fire. Uh, you mind if we save this for another time?
no problem. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
No, no,
that
no. It's
was
okay. It really gets deep, and
Jesus.
but I was really struggling. I was really struggling with the why. I mean, if ever I felt like Job, it was just
Mm,
like why? And
mm,
I people would always say, "Oh, God has a reason for it," and I'm just like,
yeah.
I need something. I need
Right.
something. Um, how could God allow so much loss and grief? Um, I also felt like, because at that point I was teaching out in Utah and having a really hard time out there. Another IFB church and school. They were, oh, it was one of those things where I was seeing severe injustices happen.
Hmm.
And I tried to do my part to right those wrongs and couldn't. I didn't
What
have the
did you
power.
see?
For example, we had one little kid. He was in second grade, and he was a bit of a rebel. Think Dennis the Menace.
Okay.
Cute as can be, but oh, he could be a stinker.
Hmm.
And their solution was, we will bring him in every morning before anything gets started and swat him.
Whoa. Okay.
And I'm
All
like,
right.
wait, he hasn't done anything. We're going to head it off and we're going to swat him and let him know that we're in charge. It's us against them. And I'm like, whoa, whoa.
Wait. Their plan was to preemptively spank this kid every morning.
Yep.
That. Hmm.
And that's when I decided that was going to be my last year. I tried to do what I could to make that not happen with the kid and got absolutely nowhere. They had full support of the community and it was a mess.
I was gonna say the
So,
parents were cool with that.
mhm, yeah, because I talked to the parents. I was just like, "Did you know?" And they were like, "Oh, we trust them." I was like, "Okay." Um, so one of my coworkers there at that school was a fellow teacher. I constantly, when anything hard would happen, she'd say, "God's preparing you for something bigger." And I reached my point where I was just like, "I can't. Can you stop saying that to me?"
Hmm.
Because if my life is only and ever about attaining something more, forget the here and now, there's always going to be something more, but I'll never quite reach it.
Hmm.
It was horrible. It was horrible. I just felt like that it was a goals to be attained that could never happen. And what kind of God is that?
Hmm.
That is constantly just like, whoop, not there yet, there's more. Whoop, not there yet, there's more. And in the process of getting you there, you're going to suffer like shit.
Yeah.
Um, During my time as a single Christian school teacher, it absolutely burned me out. So that was a big thing. Unfortunately, in these Christian schools, if you're a single young woman, your life is
Yep.
what we tell you it is, and that totally burned me out. From unrealistic expectations to, as I mentioned a bit ago, to seeing wrongs I couldn't right. Um, Through this time, because it was after my dad died, a year after that I moved back home to be there here for my sister and my grandparents. That was when I really started to finally see that I think I'm going to take a look at what I'm going through personally as far as my sexuality and not write it off as disgusting sin, which is what I
Hmm.
had always believed it to be. Um, Through that, I tried to talk to some of my closest friends and only got pushback. It was just like, oh no, you don't even go there. You don't even
Hmm.
go there. And so I stopped trying to talk. I just stopped trying to talk and started dealing with it myself. So by that point, I was taking care of my sister. That was in 2016. She was living with me, and at that point, I was just literally trying to survive day to day. Um,
What were you doing?
with taking care of her.
Like for work at during that time when you.
Okay, so when she ended up in the hospital, I lost my job because I had to stay in the hospital with her.
Hmm.
So it was kind of an understandable thing, but also sucked. I became her full time caregiver and was paid by the state.
Okay.
So very, very little pay. And so we
Hmm.
were we were literally just barely getting by.
Yeah.
I had no support system, local support system, and was just trying to make it. She had uh severe dementia for at least a year, where
Mm.
every day was like kind of like 51st dates,
Yeah.
but the dark side of it.
Yeah.
It was tough. It was very, very, very tough. And yeah, during that time, by that point, I stopped going to church and just kind of was trying to figure myself out. I got severely depressed, which, my brother and my sister, especially my brother, was just like, it's because you're not going to church.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. Um, So I'm trying to see if I missed anything here. Yeah, I know that earlier, kind of backtracking a little bit, but you had said that, what's some of the red flags that I experienced, and this happened both in school at Maranatha as well as in college. Those in authority acting like the Holy Spirit in the sense of micromanaging, interpreting, and assigning intent to every little thing that you would do. Um,
What do you mean?
okay, so like for example, um, those devotion sheets.
Yeah.
And it's like if you didn't fill them out correctly, your heart's not right with God.
Hmm.
And so I also dealt with it in college, where I was an RA. I became the assistant dorm supervisor after I graduated, and yet still, I would get called in on a daily basis because the dean of women saw something in me that she didn't like. And I think it was just a sense of, I've always had a sense of, I ask questions. I
Right.
say, why? How? And oh my goodness, you shouldn't do that. And she would bring me in and grill me up one side and down the other. And I was an emotional basket case my last year at college. And that was when I was actually trying to do my grad work. Um, and yeah, it was that whole thing of, who do you think you are
Yeah.
to tell me that just because I need to take some me time and therefore I miss a church service, that I'm so far off the deep end. Just things like that. It's that whole culture of, if you don't do, and if you do something for yourself, then there's obviously a problem. It's just like, there's not a problem.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Yeah. So, about the part with the authority figures dictating stuff to you, and you noticing weird things about it. I think we had a talk about Baptist Heritage Week when we talked on the phone last
Mhm.
time. Did you have something like that? Because I had a story that was my turning point or whatever. Do you remember? I thought you had a story about that too during your time
Oh,
there.
remind me, Baptist
It was
Heritage
just
Week.
like
That was,
talking about, maybe it was just me, because like one of
oh,
the big
no,
turning
I
point for
remember
me
saying
was like a week long Baptist Heritage Conference we had, and it was all about why Baptists are the correct denomination and superior to all the others. And then at the end of the week, it was just that Baptists follow the Bible. That was their answer, and it's that everyone would say that.
yeah.
I didn't know if that was a big one for you too.
So that definitely was, and that kind of questioning, I'm backtracking a lot. Started in my brain when I was little.
Hmm.
I remember back when this was before Maranatha, and my mom babysat, and one of the parents, we were actually really close to their family, and the mom came to our house to pick up her kids, and we got to chit chatting, and she was talking to dad, and she was kind of having her own spiritual crisis. And one of the things that she was asking was, how do you know that your faith, Mr. Lewis, is the only true faith?
Hmm.
Because God's word says so. Okay, but how do you know that God's word is 100% true? Because God's word says so.
God's word says so. It's like,
And I remember, I was just little. I was like 6 maybe.
oh wow.
And I remember sitting there going, yeah, in my mind, yeah, dad, how do we know?
Hmm.
And he explained it all comes down to faith. Okay, I get that. But you see, gosh,
You see the problem here, right? You see the problem. Yeah.
when
It's,
you've gone through so much of life and the
mhm.
shit that life can throw at you, you come to realize that, man, this life is not black and white.
Mhm.
It is gray like crazy. And that's something that the IFB movement does not like. They do not like gray.
Yeah.
Um, and I came to learn that some stuff as simple as, to each their own. You believe, you grew up Catholic and you believe that, great.
Mhm.
Um, and I know that when I say all this, I actually have this at the end of my notes, that I hear the voice in my head of my past saying, now wait a second, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and because I was there, even when it comes to, my sexuality and how I try to explain to like my sister, here's what I've come to realize, because that was a journey in and of itself. Um, I know what she's thinking. I know that she's going to this passage and that passage, and it's just like
Yep.
it's not as simple as certain passages. So I don't mean to get off track or anything.
No, that's fine.
You were saying it really wasn't for me. It was a building. It was a journey
Hmm.
of things from when I was little that I would observe and be like, "Oh, that doesn't seem right," to as I matured and started to be like, "Wait a second, that really doesn't seem right, and this just flat out is wrong. It's got to be wrong." To when I went to college and started getting an education that was outside that tiny little bubble, even though itself was still in a bubble. But it helped me, it gave me a perspective of there's more. There's more to thinking and believing and learning and living,
Hmm.
and then being on my own and going through a lot of loss and grief.
Yeah.
It has made me realize that, for example, I remember one college professor is like, it is absolutely unbiblical to believe that ghosts exist,
Hmm.
and here's the reasons why. And it's like, okay, if you want to believe that ghosts don't exist, that's fine. You want to believe certain things of, if someone talks about that there's a ghost, it's only and ever a demon. Okay, go through some life, go through some life, go through some experience, and then come talk to me, or don't. I don't
Or
care.
don't. Or don't.
But I don't know. It's something that you and Trevor said that I watched when I watched it the other day that just
Hmm.
really rang true, was how dangerous the the paradigm is of always what's coming next. What's coming next in the next life,
Oh yeah, yeah.
to the detriment of
This
here
one.
and now.
Yeah.
Let's be kind to each other. Let's love each other. Why? Because we should be kind to each other and we should love each other, not simply just because we're shooting for the day. It's like, no, I'm living. I'm living now. I have a partner who I adore and she adores me, and we're happy, and we try to be the best people that we can be. That was something when you guys were saying that, we both were just like applauding. It was just like, wow, that's great.
Yeah, that is one of the more pernicious elements of this type of like magical religiosity. At you're always you can excuse literally anything here on earth if you can tell people that, better things, there's an amusement park waiting for you after you die. So because it kind of renders this life irrelevant. I don't know if I
No,
gave this example when I was talking to Trevor, that the way I look at it is, if you have the promise of eternal life when you die and you get to see all your family members and God will be there, and it's like, it would be like if I gave you $500 right now and said, okay, here's $500, go shopping, do whatever you want, have fun with it. But when you're done, I'm going to give you $500 million.
mhm,
Or let's say that you're getting $500 and that's all you get. Which 500 are you going to cherish more? Obviously, the one where that's all you're getting. And so, putting like all your rewards on the back end, it allows you to do things like say, well, this is the right religion and we're going to start a holy war for it,
yeah,
because, we need to purge the population of stuff like this. And do
yeah,
you remember the song "In the Sweet By and By"? That
yeah,
song in church?
yeah.
So that song is there was a parody of that song back in the 1930s during the labor movement. And the parody was about pie in the sky, which a phrase we still use,
Right.
but it was used in the reverse manner back then. I don't know if you heard this already,
I've
but
not. I'm gonna have to look
so
that up. Do you remember what it's
yeah,
called?
So yeah, it was the I don't remember how the song goes, but the end of the song was "There'll be pie in the sky when you die." That's how. And so what it was used for? It was telling people, hey, don't bother doing these labor unions. Don't fight for better worker rights. Don't fight for weekends or 8-hour workdays instead of 12-hour workdays. Your life may suck right now, but there'll be pie in the sky when you die. And that's they were making fun. The song was a parody making fun of people saying the anti-labor union people, but that's essentially what people are taught. And I think I remember that conversation Trevor and I are having, because I've seen people like break apart for their families for the most absurd reasons, and let's say, well, it'll all be all right because we'll be in heaven together. Right? You don't know that. You don't know. Like, you have no guarantee of that. And when that lady was arguing with your dad, I had my version of that at the store when I was arguing with Jehovah's Witness. I loved like debating different religions and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember her saying something that'll never leave my mind. And I was telling her why what I believe was right. She was arguing her point. And she told me this some doctrine from Jehovah's Witness. She says, and I said, look, I don't believe that. And she said, well, listen, it's true whether you believe it or not. And I was like, oh, wow, I've said that exact same thing. I said that exact same thing. And I realized we both have equal evidence. Like, this book says it, so it must be true. And I was like, oh, that didn't sit well with me at all.
Another one, which I've used, is I was witnessing to a coworker years ago. This was before college. I was at a bank, and I said, okay, so let's say that you're right. There's nothing afterwards. We die. That's it. All right. But what if I'm right? And even now, it's like, okay, I see the merit in that, but the purpose behind it, I didn't have malice in my heart when I said this. I truly was concerned and cared. But it was also, it's like, okay, what is this with the striking fear in your heart and just making you like, but what if,
Yeah.
when we can't know?
Yeah.
We can't know. Um, I'm going to jump ahead here because one of your questions was, what are your current thoughts on faith, religion, and spirituality?
Hmm.
Long story short, I don't know what mine looks like right now.
Hmm.
Partly because I grew up with such a tight, defined paradigm that I realized as life has gone on, it falls apart.
Yeah.
What does it look like now for me? I'm not sure.
Hmm.
Um, but I have to say that that whole, what was, didn't, I know what it was. It was that documentary that I was watching. They talked about, they were referencing some group of, like, but pulpit pounding, Bible throwing, fire from hell, and they called them the Spirit of Fear group. And it's like, God actually tells us to not live in a spirit of fear, and yet that's often the tactic that we use to spread his gospel. I'm using
Hmm.
air quotes there. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is just, it's just, it's so exclusive. I do want to give an example. When this was after my dad had died, and my sister was just not doing well at all. But she'd become agoraphobic. She had some severe mental health issues for almost her entire adult life. Uh,
Hmm.
Severe anxiety, social anxiety. She was agoraphobic, couldn't leave her house, couldn't even really get into a car. But she had good days. And on those good days, she would try to go to church on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And as close as she could get, you know, to where she lived, the closest church, it was only like 2 miles down the road, was Briarwood Baptist Church. And she was excited. I mean, it was astounding. It was great that she could get out and go and be with people. And she would tell me about it, and I'd tell her what a great job she was doing, and I was proud of her. And Then one day I was talking to her and she was just like really sad. And I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, I was talking to Rachel, Rachel Matthews, from Maranatha, and I was all excited about, telling her that I was able to go to church. I hadn't been able to get to church in months. And Rachel chewed her out by telling her that if she wasn't going to Maranatha, she was not in God's will.
Mm.
And it was like, but I'm going to church. It was like,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter. If it's not Maranatha, you're not in God's will.
Mm.
So that all of those things, all of these things, it's just like it's just us. What we say is correct. Nothing about you.
Mhm.
Nothing what you want. Not out there. It's us, and all of that. I had to become free of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's impossible to hold on to, and it's
Yeah.
impossible to justify also, like, intellectually. You
Yeah.
can't do it. The more you think about it, you can't.
Right.
It's
It just
like when
crumbles.
I know when you were talking about how it is cringy to think of the stuff that you said back in those days. If we have time, I'd like you to talk about us on Wednesdays when the kids would go witnessing on Wednesdays.
Oh
You remember that? That's
God.
gonna be so. I like if we jump on that real quick. But I remember when I left the faith. I had a conversation that was the reverse of what you had, where you were talking about, hey, well, what if I'm right? And I would tell people that I no longer believed in God or anything anymore. And I was stunned at how many people asked me, okay, but what if you're wrong? As if I never thought about that, as if that thought never crossed my mind. And I would just say, okay, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
What if like another religion, you'll be in hell right along with me if another religion is right. So as many religions have existed in human history, you should expect to be wrong just mathematically. There's no
Yeah.
way you happen to pick the right one out of thousands of religions.
And really, just looking at that line of argument, you could sit there and what if till the cows
Right?
come home. It's just like, okay, what's
Exactly.
the point of all this?
Right? Yeah. It's
Leave
kind of
me
funny.
alone.
Yeah.
You know,
And I can't believe that band named themselves the Spirit of Fear. Because, like, God has not given us the spirit of fear is a very popular verse. Like,
yeah,
why would you name yourself under something that God
yeah,
obviously did not give you? And you mentioned the ghost were demons thing. That's always been a fascinating topic to me because we did actually I don't know if we did an episode talking. Oh no, it was a different show I was on, but we were taught that ghosts weren't real. I mean, at
mm,
Maranatha,
oh
growing up
yeah,
and everything. But there's a weird Bible verse where Saul resurrects Samuel's ghost. Remember that? And I
yep.
was like, okay, that's a ghost.
Wait a
I don't care.
second.
It's like, say what?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I was just like, wait a second.
Yeah, someone explained this to me. And by the way, not only did that lady pull up a ghost, that was her job. The
Yep,
Bible says that this is just what she did
yep,
because Saul outlawed necromancing or whatever that was, and he sought her out specifically. So Saul certainly believed that ghosts could be risen, and it worked. So I guess ghosts are real. And so that was a demon. Saul, I don't know. And they would say ghosts were demons and that UFOs were demons because UFOs aren't real either. I don't know. It was just a weird thing
it
that
all
they.
came down to Satan's doing all he can to distract you
I
from your
know.
mission.
I know. It's just like honestly, the Satan thing kind of falls apart too. Because actually not the Satan story or whatever, which is interesting because the Satan we know now doesn't really exist in the Bible. It's just kind of legends and kind of stitched together. And
Yeah,
like Satan was a title, not a person, like in the book
yep.
of Job and everything. And I shouldn't say about Satan. I was going some of this. Fuck, I forgot. What were we talking about? Stitching
Uh,
together Satan. Oh, the Bible.
yeah, I kind of
Oh, it
got
doesn't
lost
matter.
there.
That doesn't matter. I'll
Sorry.
remember it later. But I still think okay. So I wanted to get into like when you left. So like we kind of went into it like with what Rachel told Rebecca that if you're not in this church, you aren't in God's will. How did you tell everyone that you were no longer part of this religion, this cult? It's a cult. Like when we grew up, it was 100% a cult.
Yeah,
People
absolutely.
don't understand how incredibly dangerous and harmful like these little pockets are
Yeah,
of religious zealotry and the damage that's done to families across the country. But when you come out, now I was very lucky when I told my parents that I was no longer a believer, that I never thought for a second that my folks would disown me, that they'd be angry with me, which not everyone has that luxury. A lot of people actually do have their family break contact with them. I was never afraid of that. I was just afraid that my parents would think that their son was going to burn in hell. That's what I was afraid of. That's the only thing I was afraid of. And I did eventually tell them, and my folks are no longer part of this movement at all. They've broken free of it, just like everybody else in my family, honestly. My brother, my sister, and they're not part of it anymore. As far as I know, they're all still believers of some sort, but it's not like it was back then. So what was it like for you? These are always very difficult because even for like my story is literally as good as it could possibly be.
Yeah.
But there's like a whole range on the way down of like, well, my family and I, we're comfortable, or we're on pleasant terms. We just don't talk anymore, or I moved away. I haven't seen them in 10 years. So where did you fall on that spectrum?
So when I first stopped going to church was, as I had mentioned earlier, was when I started taking care of my sister. What I was able to communicate was that I couldn't. I mean,
Hmm.
when I was taking care of my sister, I literally it was minute to minute survival
Yeah.
for a long time. Um, and then yeah, it became a thing because, like I said earlier, I got very depressed, and my brother kept saying, "You need to go to church. You need to go to church," and I wasn't about where I was living at the time. I knew that the only churches around there were IFB, and I was
Hmm.
not about to subject myself to that bullshit, literally.
Yeah.
Um, and I also was struggling. I was struggling with, should I do this? Am I wrong in not doing this? And this was at the same time that I was like discovering who I was and not understanding what that meant as far as what does God's word say, and do I care about what God's word says, and
Hmm.
is it just been misinterpreted, and all of these things. Um, so I have to say that my uh, revelation was also my coming out story.
Hmm.
Um, I think before that, so the way I came out to, I talked to my sister, and then the next conversation was to my brother, and that was quite hard. Um, and then, because my wife and I had only known each other for 2 or 3 months when we became engaged, and I ripped off that band-aid, and that's how I announced it to the world, was Facebook status,
Hmm.
relationship
Whoa.
status.
Whoa.
Not only am
What?
I engaged, but I'm
What?
engaged to a woman.
What?
So
Wow. How
it
did that
definitely
go?
it definitely was one of those situations where it's just like, okay, do I dare do this? As a matter of fact, I remember that when I did it, I'm like, I'm just doing it. And she goes, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yep." And I get on there
Oh,
and
that's wild.
I type it out and I hit submit, and all of a sudden I think I turned like ghost white because I was just like, "Oh, I just did that." And I almost wanted to go back and delete it, but then it was just like, "No, just leave it." Okay. So some of my closest friends that I had known from freshman year and on, I'm talking like they were family, um, didn't speak to me at all for like a year or two, I think.
They didn't respond to this at all. They didn't send you a
Some,
message or an
some
email
of
or
them,
anything.
some of them, like the ones that I was closest to, no response of any kind. And then finally, after a year or two, I'm like, I'm, I, I was scared. I was petrified. But I was like, I'm gonna call. I'm gonna call
Yeah. Yeah.
one person in particular, and hopefully it'll just be, let's we're still friends, right?
Hmm.
And at first, for the better part of the conversation, that's what it seemed to be. And then when it was about like, okay, well, it's getting late, I gotta go, she started bawling. And I knew,
Mm.
I was like, okay, here it comes. And that's
Yeah.
okay. That's okay. I know that this is breaking my friend's heart. And that's not, I didn't do this to you, friend, but I know it's breaking your heart. I know. And I'm sorry. And I told her that. I let her cry and I said, I'm sorry. None of this was to hurt anybody. And when she was able to talk again, she's like, how could you? That's what she said. How could you? And I was just like, how could I what? And she goes, you know better. And don't you even expect to get any kind of support from any of us. This is I call them my Utah family.
Mhm.
They were we went to college together. I moved out to Utah, became practically part of the family. I taught out there before moving back this way after dad died. And she just flat out went down the list of their family members and being like, don't try to get support from mom. Don't try to get support from dad. Don't try to get support from any of the siblings because they
Mhm.
all feel the same way that I do. And I'm just like, okay. And it was heartbreaking. It was very, very heartbreaking. And on the Facebook side of it, I did have people. I had one person that I've known my entire life, back from our landmark days,
Mhm.
get on there and say that mom and dad were rolling over in their graves.
Oh, fuck them. Oh,
And
that.
all of these, I mean, he just started preaching. And I got on there and I was like, hey, if you want to talk to me about this, private message me, but don't do it on here. He didn't stop. I had to remove him. I had to block him. I had to block him as, he was unfriended, blocked.
Mhm.
Another person from, you're going to love this, another person from Utah got on there and said, Heather, I need to ask for your forgiveness. And I'm like, why? And we hadn't talked since I was out in Utah. So it's been several years.
Mhm.
And he said, I just really believe that if we had kept in better touch, then you wouldn't have gone down this road. And I was just like, I got on there and I'm like, how do I say this delicately? Who do you think you are?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And
Wow.
I was just like, I literally take offense. I told him this. I said, I literally
Mhm.
take offense at the fact that you think that you have that much influence in my life. We
Mhm.
were we were just friends. We weren't even really that close. And that what I've done is like some bad result of a lack of communication.
With
No.
this one particular person. Yeah. It's like.
And it was just like, no. And I'm thankful for the strength that I had to embrace, here's who I am and I'm not ashamed of it.
Mhm.
Do I have my own personal struggles with what that means with my faith? Yes, I do. But I
Really.
also, yeah, but I also, so I still consider myself a believer.
Mhm.
It's just, what does that look like? Because what it comes down to, and here's what I wrote. You mind if I jump ahead real quick to the what are your
No.
current thoughts? Okay.
Yeah.
I've always been very strong in my faith until I wasn't. I hit a wall there back in 2016, around there, and just really struggled. But even then I rested in the knowledge that God would always hold on to me.
Mhm.
That he was a lot bigger than all of the bullshit that people were giving me. And even my own bullshit, okay? Because I bring a lot of bullshit to the table.
Mhm.
Now, what I absolutely do know is that the God that I believe in is not the same God I was raised to believe in many
Mhm.
respects. And when I say in many respects, I don't look at my childhood and my past and completely discount all of it.
Mhm.
I do believe that, like going back to my parents, I do believe that they raised they raised me to believe in the loving God that there is. What
Mhm.
I believe. Okay. Um, I do struggle to know now what I believe, what my belief looks like. I
Right.
really couldn't define it at this point. A part of me wonders if, and I thought about this after you and I talked the other day on the phone. It struck me, and I was like, a part of me wonders if I can't completely let go of the faith of my past, because
Mhm.
I've lost my past in every other way. Like,
Ah,
my
hmm.
dynamic with my family is completely, I mean, key members of my family are literally gone. My parents, my grandparents on both sides, aunts and uncles out the wazoo. So many have died. And those who are here, it is so different. We don't communicate. It's sad. It's very sad. So, and then my friends, the friends that I would have considered my lifelong friends, have literally turned away from me. And so, is that part of why I have a hard time letting go of, like, completely letting go and being willing to say that's not what I believe and I believe in something completely different? Very possibly.
Mhm.
And I own that, and that's something that's an internal thing that I've got to work through. Um, when it comes to established religions, that's where I tend to cringe. When it
Mhm.
comes to, like, the church, I'm not saying there are bad church, that all churches out there and all religions are bad, not at all. But it's the institution that I have struggled with the most from the IFB movement.
Mhm.
Um, so to this day, I believe that there is a strength in acknowledging faiths and spiritualities, and very much my philosophy is to each their own.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, my wife is an agnostic atheist. That was another thing when we were watching the episode with you and Trevor, and you defined that for the
Mhm.
listeners. It was just like, yeah. Um, I have to say I probably lean a lot more towards the agnostic side, um, than ever before.
Mhm.
And what it looks like after that, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know,
Um,
and I'm not ashamed for not knowing. I used to be ashamed. I used to be ashamed and think I was a woman of principles and I knew what I believed and I believed what I knew, and it's just like, you know what? Chill.
yeah. Yeah. It's just, what, it's just the thing that I always say that I miss the most from those days is the certainty. That was
Yeah,
great. It
yeah,
was great knowing all the answers. And uh fortunately I happen to know the answer to everything else, so I can at least take solace in that. But when it comes to the religious stuff, I don't have any answers at all. And nobody does. That's
yeah,
why, so you were talking about how your goal here isn't to state that you think that, all churches or religious institutions are bad.
mm,
Um, However, but they are all made up. It's important to point that out. Like, so yeah, so like when you're saying that, yeah, so each their own, because it's all made up. It's
yeah,
all people just making guesses
yeah.
with the best available knowledge that they have, and to not act like it's more than it actually is. That's
Yeah,
that's what
and what one of the other things that, and this is typically well known mantra, I guess you could say, is religions exist because we need them.
mhm.
Okay, if that's the only reason why a religion exists or a faith exists is because we, as finite beings, need something greater than us,
Mhm.
go for it.
Yeah, it's I
You
did
know, what harm does it do? The harm comes in to those that actually start causing harm to others.
that's it. Yeah,
And that's
that
kind of the crux of this whole matter. You know
exactly,
what I
because
mean?
so my thing is with religion, why I don't particularly care for it. Now I have a lot of complex opposite surprise that everybody does, but is that like belief, and like say you have a belief in a deity or multiple deities or whatever. All right, like that in and of itself, I mean, fine. But once you start putting rules and a system in there that you
Yeah,
can't verify, you're essentially training people to be superstitious,
yeah.
and that's not good. Like that, I don't think that. Now it's funny. So I don't know if we talked about this. I lose track with these conversations with Trevor or whatever. I have my own theory about why religion is so ingrained in humanity,
Mm,
and it's not. I mean, I'm the only person to think of it, but essentially if you go back to like your like early human civilizations, like let's say you go back in time 200,000 years,
mhm,
and all the people we have, just barely stepped out of ape mode, and we're living in the African savannah, you know, your lifespan is like 28 years, and you eat roots and berries and try not to get devoured by a lion. That's your entire life. And then the people that you're with, you're in a tribe of 150 to 200 people. You're related to most of them. You know them all. That is your community. And you're like, okay, so I'm going to trust this person here because she's my cousin. And I'm going to trust this person here because I've known him since I was a child. You run across someone new, you don't know if this is someone you can trust or not. Someone like a different tribe of people, they might be trying to steal your resources. They might be out to murder you. You don't know because you have nothing in common. But you start talking to them and you mention you worship the moon god. Like, I worship the moon god too. Now you got something in common. So I think the people who were, more likely to believe in a religion, were more likely to procreate because they built a stronger community. And that's one of the strengths of religious communities, that it gives people purpose and a sense of community that's actually really hard to replace.
Is huge.
It's really hard to replace once it's gone. Like, I haven't found an equal substitute to that. And this is something that I have a hard time explaining to people who didn't grow up the way we do, because a lot of folks, they say that, like politically or whatever, they'll say that, these religions, they don't really believe all of that awful, evil stuff and everything. They're just, taking God's word and they're twisting it. And I was like, sometimes, but sometimes they're not twisting it at all. Sometimes that's literally what it says. And they're just using it. And it just happens to be, Bronze Age barbarism. So it's going to be pretty bad. But they say that people don't really believe this. Yes, they do. Like, we actually believe this. And so I always said, whenever I lost my faith, when I realized that I was an atheist, it felt like I lost a limb. Like, it was one of the worst periods of my life, because God was not a thought experiment for me. God was my friend. And, a phrase that they always said in this movement was that, Jesus is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And that's kind of what it felt like. Although that was always a funny phrase to me, because that's from the book of Proverbs. And it's not talking about God at all. Like, the verse is, a man who has friends must show himself friendly. And there's friends who stick closer than a brother. It's like, that's just talking about friends. But that was just weird. But it works. It works for the whole thing with God. So, making sure that God being in your life is such a comfort and a solace, and he is your friend. And I 100% get what you're talking about, that especially going through, I mean, so nobody stuck around from your past then, from like college, or, I mean, I don't know how many people you still knew from Maranatha by that time, like in...
I've not really kept in touch with a lot of people. I'm kind of terrible. I thought that, through the years, through college, because I started at Bob Jones, and then I went to Northland, and
Wait, you went to Bob Jones for how long?
Yeah, for a year.
I didn't know that, huh?
Yeah. That's where I wanted to go. And then I during my summers of college at Northland, I volunteered at a youth camp in Southwest New Mexico, and I spent a summer out in Guam when Matt was out there. So there's been significant times in my life where I'm like, immersed in these communities of people where I get really close to them, and everything's like, we're gonna stay in touch. And that hasn't, I am where I am. And I don't do a good job afterwards keeping in touch. But I have to say that for the few people that I knew, and they became like family to me through college and after college during my years of teaching, those are the ones that it hurts the most.
Damn.
Yeah. But I have a new family. I have a new family. I have a found family, and very, very grateful for them. I have a great job. We have our fur babies. That's important. And I have my wife's family. They're very, very supportive. We're actually going out to see them in a couple weeks. She grew up on Long Island. Is it in Long Island or on Long Island? On Long Island. They get really testy. They get
like
really
on
testy
Guam.
when you say it the wrong way. It's like, it's not in Long Island, it's on Long. Okay.
I know, right? It's like,
So so yeah, she's got a great family. They are very supportive of us, and she's the oldest sister of a bunch of younger brothers who love teasing her
ah.
that they call her all kinds of crass lesbian names,
What the
but
fuck? What the
it's
fuck?
I'm not gonna go into that, but they're just like, oh, look at you, sis, you're getting it,
Oh, what the
So
fuck?
we
All
have
right.
we have a good time. We have a good
That's
time.
good
So
stuff.
yeah.
I want to close there. You mentioned that you said that you actually had a hard time keeping up with people in the past and the stuff like that. You were just moving on anyway. Did you ever watch Mad Men? Have you ever seen that show?
Mad
Mad Men. Well, it's
oh,
it's they're advertisers in
yes. Yes.
yeah, Don
Yes, I
Draper.
did
And
see that.
so
Okay. Yeah. I was
there's an
looking it up.
episode. Yeah, Don Draper, he like it's not his real name. He took the name of a guy who died in the war and he started a brand new life under a fake
Yes.
personality. And I remember a line he said when his brother finds him. His brother is like, it's been 10 years and I haven't seen you. What's been going on? And he's like, his brother's name is Adam. He says, Adam, my life moves in one direction, forward. And that's what I thought of when you said that. And I was like, when you
No,
said
and it's not even that's funny. That's
it
really
is funny.
It's more of I'm so present with
Mhm.
where I am that it's like it's not that I don't appreciate the bond that we had then, but I I'm bonding with different people.
Your
it's
life
it's
moves
it's
away.
something it's something I always tried to deny. I always tried to deny. I thought somewhere along the line I realized, you know what, I just need to own this. And when
Mhm.
I'm saying goodbye to these friends, like when I left Guam, it's just like I'm probably not going to keep in touch, but
Just so you
been
guys know.
great, you know. So
And the second thing I wanted to close out with before we end this here, we actually did 2 episodes on Bob Jones
really,
for the show. Yeah, we did an episode. The first, it may have been our second episode we did, and I talked about. It was mainly about Bob Jones Sr. and
mm,
how he started the university and some wild stuff he says there. There's one line he says he was active in South Carolina politics back in the 20s or 30s or something, and he wrote this article and talking about why this guy shouldn't be elected for governor or whatever it was. And what did he say? He said that I would rather a drunkard be president or be governor than it's president. He said I would rather a drunkard win the presidency than this guy. And then he says I would rather an N-word be the president than this guy. It's like, yeah, it was we Bob Jones has a colorful past. If you want to look
he
at
was
that,
he
guys.
was against that guy
Oh yeah,
apparently.
apparently so. Yeah, he was. He was.
Wow.
So yeah, Bob Jones. We did a couple episodes on them, but that was some fantastic stuff. But all right, well, Heather, I appreciate this so much. We'll definitely have you
Thank
on again because
you.
there's a lot of topics I'd love to cover with
Yeah.
you. A lot more. Like on the I want to find another term for nerd shit going into like the intro. You already you know what I'm talking about, like with
Yes.
the Bible and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the college experience, like
Yeah.
a lot of our talks are about specifically colleges,
Mhm.
and I only know a very little bit about Northland, and I'd like to get, and I'm glad to hear you went to Bob Jones too, to get kind of the experience from there. So the next couple of weeks we are booked, but if you have something that you would like to discuss too, I'd love to. Just let me know and we could
I'd love to.
definitely set it up.
I'll be in touch with that. And I really appreciate you doing this and giving me the opportunity to get on here. I trudging up the past, and you don't want to like run people through the mud and stuff because of past things, and because we all. That's something else that I've learned is, you know what? Just because shit has happened and people have done some awful things, you've got a chance to move forward
Hmm.
and become a better person. I don't care what age you are. And that in and of itself is kind of outside the paradigm of no, you've done those sins and
Yeah,
therefore, you know.
yeah, that's true.
So but I appreciate this opportunity.
No
And
problem.
it was good seeing you and
It
talking
was
to
great.
you.
Yeah.
Blast
Yeah, I
from the
know.
past, man.
Yeah, we dropped in for the first time in 25 years. This is
I
fine.
know.
It's perfectly okay. It's
It's
good.
awesome. I love it.
All right. So I'm going to close out here
Okay.
the stream.